You're very welcome back to the programme. Well, now to South Sudan. It's the world's youngest country, born out of a long and very complex war with its roots in oil. The country has had its independence for just 3 years, but it's already embroiled in deep internal conflict. And now the UN is warning of the potential for a humanitarian crisis if the violence doesn't stop for long enough to allow crops to be planted. Well, I'm joined now by a surgeon who's just back from working for Médecins Sans Frontières in the country, Professor Paul McMaster. Thank you very much indeed for coming into us this morning. It's very interesting. I mean, you've had a career yourself at the very cutting edge of surgery, liver transplantation, oncology, and now in your retirement you're working for MSF and real spots of conflict around the world. Yeah. How would you describe what's going on in South Sudan in comparison to some of the other places you would have been?
I think it's really very difficult indeed now. The acute phase of the fighting is eased a little bit, but people have left their homes, they've left their families often, and they've fled. There's nearly 1 million people that are displaced internally. And this is what's called the hunger gap time before the harvest will come in months. And there's a real crisis for people getting access to food and care. Médecins Sans Frontières worked for a long while, and I was there with our emergency surgical teams dealing with the casualties and the civilians caught up. But it's a tragic situation for such a young nation now.
And do you think, I mean, Paul, that people are aware even of what's going on in South Sudan?
Well, I mean, there's a crisis on your news today, of course, which is, and the truth is that media does move on, but the crisis that is there now will be there for many, many months to come. And if the community, international community, doesn't engage with that, we will face a real tragedy for many thousands of people.
I know, and you've been writing about it yourself. You describe the situations you're seeing there, particularly children distanced from their families, the violence still going on, the kind of injuries that you're dealing with. I mean,
as a surgeon who's worked in conflict situations, you get used to it. It's a terrible thing to say, but you do get used to it. But for me as a grandfather now, to see the children and to see a little girl who's walked with for 3 to 4 days, who's lost contact with her parents, being looked after by her younger brother of 7, and wondering what on earth does the future hold for those youngsters in the youngest nation on earth. And the answer is it will be bleak unless we can continue to support them. The news moves on, we understand that, but these people's needs will be present for many moons to come.
And what is the situation in terms of funding for MSF in South Sudan at the moment?
Well, we have been immensely supported, and certainly the Irish people are immensely generous. And Irish Aid have been supportive of many of our projects. But we are beginning to struggle now. We're struggling Syria, some of our teams are just out of the Philippines, there are other places as well. But there's no doubt that we cannot do our medical work without the support of many generous and caring people.
And is MSF mostly funded by governments around the world?
No. We're neutral, impartial and all those things, but more than 85% of our support comes from individuals who give quite modest sums of money on a regular basis, and that is our core. If there's an event that takes place today, we can put a medical team in to assess and to respond. We don't have to write long reports and apply to organisations, and that is where the freedom comes to medically respond. So it's the support of individuals which allows the medics to do their work, and that's critically important. And
MSF has been very innovative as well. I mean, you've got inflatable hospitals now. Tell me about this.
We have. Well, we go into wherever the need is and start doing that work. But we would very quickly try to establish reasonable facilities. So we have our inflatable field hospitals that come in and are blown up, and will provide operating theatres and recovery.
So you can blow them up and you have a sterile environment.
That's right.
In the middle of a desert or a
nowhere.
conflict zone?
That's right. And we've got 3 field hospitals like that at the moment in South Sudan.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's phenomenal. Now, you were saying you're on your way to Afghanistan yourself as well. That's another...
I am. Well, part of my task in MSF now is to look at our strategy and how we manage situations and try and look forward. And Of course, at the end of this year, there'll be a change and NATO troops will be withdrawn. And we need to be sure we're in the right places to give the people the support if that's needed.
You need to get ready. And can I ask you, I mean, from a personal point of view, having worked, as I say, you know, at the very cutting edge of Western medicine, you know, where millions of euro could potentially be going into just a handful of procedures.
Yes.
How different is it for you now to be working in this type of medicine? How does it compare?
It's very different, but what isn't different is we're trying to do the very best we can for the individuals that seek our help and care. And whether that's in a very high-tech situation or a much more basic, the principle is really no different. We're there really because the needs of the people are so high, and our task is to try to meet some of them. We can't solve all their problems, but some of them we can perhaps ease and help them to fight another day.
And do you find it easy enough to get medical professionals like yourself to go out and get involved with MSF?
No, we don't. We do struggle sometimes. Understandably, families are not keen for their loved ones to go to some of these places, and understandably, health boards are reluctant to let their staff in times of pressure go away. So we can be short, and particularly people with, how do I put this, more experience who can cope in these settings.
Who aren't going to fall to pieces when they get into a very, very difficult situation.
Who aren't going to fall to pieces. No, we fall to pieces when we come back.
Yeah, I mean, it really is fascinating. I mean, and also, when you land on the ground, first of all, how long does it take you to get up and running? I mean, when you come into the initial conflict situation.
Oh, I mean, you start right away. You set up a casualty clearing area, you start to review, you start to triage the patients, prioritise, work out what the steps will be. So you would start to move very quickly indeed. Many of these people with gunshot wounds will have wounds that need cleaning and attention. You can start that immediately. The more complex operating usually takes 10 to 12 hours to start to put into place.
And for someone like yourself, I mean, is it a whole different skill set you'd be using in a complex zone? I mean, it's a long way. A gunshot must be quite a long way from a liver transplant.
It is. Very. A lot of the surgery is fairly simple, I'm afraid, and really, in some ways, quite crude. You're often dealing with infected wounds, not in conflict, but in Haiti, for instance, people have been trapped in the rubble for days. So a lot of the surgery is fairly basic.
But you'd be just cutting away infection, would you? Or?
Well, you'd be cleaning up. Sometimes you do have to cut away, and sadly we sometimes have to amputate as well. But the decision processes are just the same. What is the need? What is the best way of helping the person with this? What is the quickest way to rehabilitate them and get them back onto their feet and about?
Well, listen, Paul, thanks very much for coming in to us, and the very best luck now, well, first off in South Sudan, but also in your trip to Afghanistan later in the week.
Thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, now it is time for the business news, and Brian Finn is here. Brian.
Keelin.